You wake in darkness. The silk against your skin feels like a shroud. Your hands are trembling, though the room is warm. Outside your door, voices murmur in a language that suddenly feels foreign, even though you've spoken it all your life. You are 15 years old. You are a princess. And tonight you will learn why that word, princess, is not a blessing. It is a curse dressed in gold. This is not how fairy tales prepared you for this moment. Before we journey deeper into this hidden chapter, I have to pause and say, it amazes me every time I see where you're all watching from. Drop your country in the comments. The fact that a story buried for 6 centuries in Ottoman archives is now reaching screens across the world, that's the kind of magic the internet was made for. Now, let's go back. The year is 1617. The city is Istanbul, jewel of 3 continents, beating heart of an empire that stretches from the gates of Vienna to the sands of Yemen. At its center rises Topkapi Palace, a fortress of marble and mystery. And within that palace, sealed behind latticed windows and guarded corridors, exists a world most will never see, the imperial harem. History remembers it as a place of intrigue and seduction. Lavish chambers where concubines danced and plotted, where mothers of sultans wielded invisible power. And that part is true. But there was another story, one the chroniclers didn't write, one the poets didn't sing, one that survived only in coded medical logs, in private letters never meant for publication, in whispers passed between women who knew they could never speak aloud. It is the story of the Sultan's daughters, the princesses of the Ottoman throne, born into unimaginable privilege, destined for unimaginable suffering. In the spring of 1617, a girl named Ake Sultan turns 12 years old. She is the daughter of Sultan Ahmed I, ruler of the most powerful empire on earth. She has never left the palace grounds. She has never walked a street, touched a market stall, or heard the unfiltered laughter of common children. But within the walls of Topkapi, she has everything. Tutors in Arabic, Persian, astronomy, and poetry. Gardens where nightingales sing at dusk. Silks from Damascus, perfumes from Mecca, sweets glazed with rose water and dusted with gold. She learns to play the oud. She studies the stars through bronze astrolabes. She reads the poets of Andalusia and debates philosophy with scholars twice her age. She is, by every measure, extraordinary, and none of it will save her, because Ake is not being raised to rule or to think or to choose. She is being raised to be given away. In the Ottoman system, princesses were instruments of statecraft. Their marriages were not unions of love. They were transactions, political insurance policies. A princess wed to a powerful pasha bound that man's loyalty to the throne. It neutralized threats. It rewarded service. It created networks of obligation that held the empire together. But it required something absolute from the girl herself, total surrender. And so, beneath the music lessons and the poetry, beneath the luxury and the praise, another education was underway, one that began quietly, innocently, and then, as the wedding date approached, consumed everything. It had a name. The system was called Terbi-i-Mubarak, the sacred education dot when Ake turns 14. The announcement comes. She is to be married to Nasu Pasha, a military commander 30 years her senior, a man she has seen once from behind a screen during a state ceremony, a man whose hands are scarred from decades of war, whose eyes betray no warmth. She does not protest. She has been taught not to. 3 months before the wedding, Ike is moved to the Gelin Kosku, the bride's pavilion, a secluded wing of the palace where no sound from the outside world can reach. The windows are shuttered, the doors are locked. She will not leave until her wedding day. At first it feels like preparation. Attendants arrive with oils and perfumes. Seamstresses measure her for gowns. Cooks prepare delicate meals. Honeyed figs, almond paste, saffron rice. Everything designed, they say, to make her radiant. But then the lessons begin. Every morning before dawn, Ake is brought to a windowless chamber draped in heavy fabric. Waiting for her is Gulbahar Hatun, the mistress of brides, a woman in her 60s who has overseen the preparation of 17 princesses before her. Gulbahar's face is kind, her voice is soft. Her instructions are merciless. Ake is taught 18 different forms of bowing. How to kneel, how to lower her gaze, how to position her hands when entering a room, when offering tea, when lying down. She practices for hours until her knees bruise and her back aches. She is taught a new way of walking, measured, gliding, head tilted exactly 30 degrees, never looking up, never moving too quickly. A walk that erases her presence even as she moves through space. And then her language is taken. She is given a list of 43 approved words, phrases of gratitude, acceptance, apology, obedience. Any sentence beyond this vocabulary is forbidden. When she slips, when instinct makes her ask a question or express a preference, she is corrected, gently at first, then with escalating severity. Fasting, isolation, public reprimand before the other women of the harem. Ake learns quickly. Silence becomes her first language. But the cruelest lessons happen underground. Beneath Topkapi Palace, in chambers built during the reign of Mehmed the Conqueror, there are rooms the public will never see, replicas of bridal suites, furnished with beds, cushions, low lighting, and mannequins, life-sized figures crafted by Venetian artisans, eerily realistic, dressed in the clothing of Ottoman men. It is here that Ake faces what the palace calls talim-i-jis, rehearsals of the first night. She is 14 years old. Instructors stand at the edges of the room, issuing commands. She is made to practice gestures, positions, responses, to rehearse submission in excruciating, humiliating detail. Every hesitation is noted. Every tear is recorded. Resistance only brings more sessions. The stated purpose is to prevent shock on the wedding night, to prepare her body and mind for what is coming, to ensure she will not embarrass the family, the groom, or the empire. But the real purpose is something darker. It is to break her, to drain every ounce of will, every flicker of autonomy, so that by the time she faces her husband, there is nothing left to resist with. Modern psychologists who have studied the fragmentary records describe it as systematic conditioning, ritualized trauma designed to induce compliance through controlled terror. The Ottoman court did not invent cruelty, but they perfected it. They refined it into ceremony. In the final week before the wedding, Ake stops eating. Attendants have to force spoonfuls of honey and milk past her lips. She develops a tremor in her hands that will not go away. Palace physicians prescribe herbs, valerian, poppy extract, compounds whose formulas are lost to history. She is bathed in rose water mixed with substances that dull the senses, that make the world feel distant and soft, as though she is watching her life happen to someone else. And perhaps mercifully she is. The wedding day arrives. Istanbul erupts in celebration. Musicians fill the streets. Dancers perform in the palace courtyards. Foreign dignitaries present gifts of ivory and silk. The Sultan himself presides over a feast that lasts 7 hours. Aik sits through it all in white and gold, her face painted, her expression blank. Observers later write that she looked like a doll, beautiful, lifeless. When the final toast is raised, she is escorted to the Zifaf Kaiksku, the nuptial pavilion, a 3-tiered structure designed specifically for royal consummations. The first level, purification baths. The second, final dressing. The third, the bridal chamber itself. The walls are covered in tapestries depicting conquered cities, subdued enemies, symbols of dominance. The furniture is not chosen for comfort. Beds with hidden restraints, cushions soaked in calming oils, lighting designed to disorient. When Nasuh Pasha enters, he has been instructed by his own advisors. He has been told how to assert authority over a girl of royal blood, how to demonstrate control, how to ensure she understands from the first moment that her old life is over. What happens next is documented in medical records written in Persian, coded to obscure the worst details. Aik collapses into what physicians call sarsant, total shock. Her body shakes uncontrollably. She cannot speak. Her eyes stare at nothing. For hours she does not respond. Not to commands, not to touch, not to anything. Her mind has fled to the only place it can, away. When consummation finally occurs, the doctors note internal injuries, repeated fainting, hemorrhaging severe enough that they fear for her life. They call it Ra Gekomesi, the departure of the soul. Aik Sultan survives the night, but the girl who loved astronomy and poetry does not. In the months that follow, she develops what the palace calls the silence sickness. She speaks only in whispers, and only when directly commanded. She refuses food. She cries without cause. The presence of men, any men, even trusted servants, triggers episodes of panic so severe that she loses consciousness. Modern clinicians would recognize the symptoms immediately: post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociation, learned helplessness. But in 1617, there is no language for this, no treatment, no acknowledgement that what was done to her was violence. Instead, it is called melancholy, a natural condition of delicate women, something to be managed with herbs and prayer. Aik lives another 23 years. She bears 3 children, all by obligation. She appears at state functions when required, silent and obedient. In private letters discovered centuries later, she writes only one sentence over and over in the margins of religious texts. I was not afraid of marriage. I was afraid of the preparation. She dies in 1640 at the age of 37 on the anniversary of her wedding. The cause is listed as brain fever. No one in the palace believes it is a coincidence. And Aik is not alone. When sealed Ottoman archives were opened in 2019, historians found fragments of dozens of similar stories. Princesses who stopped speaking. Princesses who descended into what court records called holy madness. Princesses who died young, their causes of death suspiciously vague. The pattern was unmistakable, deliberate, engineered. Consider Fatma Sultan, daughter of Ahmed I and sister to Aik, married in 1623, at 15, to Kara Mustafa Pasha. On her wedding night, her screams were so piercing that guards 3 corridors away heard them and froze in place, unable to move, afraid to intervene. Court records mention nothing, but private correspondence does, letters between concerned physicians. notes scribbled in the margins of medical texts, whispers preserved in the memoirs of harem attendants who could not forget what they witnessed. Fatma never recovered. She lived 29 more years as a hollow figure, performing her duties mechanically, her spirit long departed. When she died in 1652, it was also on the anniversary of her wedding, the same mysterious brain fever. Or Gevrhan Sultan married at 13 in 1604. She developed selective mutism so severe that she communicated only through handwritten notes for the rest of her life. Palace physicians tried everything: herbal remedies, bloodletting, spiritual exorcisms. Nothing brought her voice back. She lived 41 years in silence. Some princesses resisted. Safi Sultan, married against her will in 1633, did the unthinkable. She petitioned her father, Sultan Murad IV, for divorce. In a system where questioning imperial decisions was unthinkable, where daughters were expected to accept their fate with grace and gratitude, Safi dared to say no. She presented her case with eloquence and courage. She cited her suffering. She appealed to mercy. Her petition was denied within 3 days. She was told to be grateful for the honor bestowed upon her, to remember her duty, to understand that her personal feelings were irrelevant compared to the needs of the empire. Safi returned to her husband's house and never spoke of freedom again. But she did something else, something that only came to light when her belongings were catalogued after her death in 1659. She embroidered messages into her clothing, tiny, almost invisible stitches hidden in the decorative patterns of her gowns and veils, short phrases in Ottoman Turkish that spelled out a single repeated plea: "Remember that I did not choose this." It was her testimony, her witness statement, a message in a bottle cast across centuries, hoping that someday someone would read it and understand. Other princesses found their own forms of resistance. Some faked illnesses to delay marriages. A few developed mysterious ailments that required quarantine, buying themselves months or years of freedom. One princess, whose name was deliberately erased from official records, was rumored to have poisoned herself the night before her wedding, choosing death over submission. The palace called it a tragedy, a constitutional weakness, but the women of the harem whispered the truth. It was an escape. The cruelty of the system was not ignorance or accident. It was precision. Over centuries, the Ottoman court perfected the science of breaking royal daughters. They studied what worked. They documented results. They refined techniques. The Terbiai Mubarak was not cultural tradition. It was social engineering, a calculated method of turning autonomous human beings into compliant tools. And it worked because it understood something fundamental about trauma, that the body remembers what the mind tries to forget, that fear, properly applied, can rewire a person from the inside out, that if you control someone's movement, their language, their senses, their understanding of reality itself, you can make them disappear without ever laying a blade to their skin. The mannequin rehearsals, the sensory manipulation through oils and herbs, the vocabulary restrictions, the isolation, the constant surveillance, the public humiliations disguised as corrections. Every element was designed to achieve one goal: the annihilation of self. By the time a princess reached her wedding night, she was no longer a person with desires, fears, preferences, or will. She was a vessel, an object, a symbol wrapped in silk, performing a role scripted long before she was born, and the empire celebrated it as sacred duty. Today, when tourists visit Topkapi Palace, they walk through chambers of breathtaking beauty. They admire the Iznik tiles, the fountains, the calligraphy, the treasure rooms filled with emeralds and jade. Tour guides speak of power and glory of sultans who commanded armies and shaped history. They do not mention the Gulen Koskü, the underground chambers, the rooms where girls were systematically dismantled. Those spaces still exist, but they are not on the tour map, perhaps because some histories are too uncomfortable to display, some truths too brutal to frame behind velvet ropes and museum glass. But they happened. The screens happened. The terror happened. The breaking happened. And the girls who endured it. Ike, Fatma, Geverhan, Safi, and dozens more whose names were deliberately erased, deserve more than silence. They deserve to be remembered not as symbols of exotic cruelty in a distant empire, but as human beings. Girls who loved learning, who dreamed of the future, who possessed thoughts and fears and hopes that mattered. Girls who were sacrificed on the altar of political stability. Girls whose suffering was engineered, refined, and perfected over 600 years. The fairy tale tells us that princesses live happily ever after, that being chosen is a gift, that royal blood is a blessing. History tells us something else. It tells us that power devours its own children first. That ceremony is often a mask for violence, that the most elaborate systems of control are built to hide the simplest truth. Someone is suffering, and we are choosing not to see it. In 2019, when those sealed Ottoman archives were finally opened, one document stood out among thousands. A single page written in the trembling hand of an anonymous princess sometime in the late 1600s. No name, no date, just words. They prepared me so well that I forgot I was human. And when I remembered, it was too late. That page is now preserved in Istanbul's archive, behind glass, silent. But if you stand close enough, if you read the words slowly, if you let yourself feel the weight of what they mean, you can almost hear it. The echo of a scream from 1623. The whisper of a girl who tried to say no. The voice of every daughter who was never allowed to choose. And in that moment, history stops being a story we observe from a distance. It becomes something we carry, a truth we cannot unknow, a weight we inherit simply by hearing it. The Ottoman princesses can no longer speak, but their silence says everything.